Hello and welcome to the Bloodstream Podcast, a show serving the greater bleeding disorders community, presented by Believe Limited and Bloodstream Media and made possible thanks to our presenting sponsor, Takeda. I'm your patient advocate and host, Patrick James Lynch.
And I'm your healthcare advocate, nonprofit nerd, and your other host, Amy Board, reminding you to please speak with a healthcare professional before making any treatment decisions.
On today's show, we have got the Hemophilia Federation of America's Chief Executive Officer, Dan Kelsey, on to talk about HFA Symposium, which is taking place right now, if you're listening in real time. And Brendan Hayes from the National Bleeding Disorders Foundation joins us with the latest gene therapy segment made possible by CSLBehring. We have got all of that and more on today's episode. Welcome to Bloodstream.
Hey, listeners, as always, thank you for joining us today. And if you're at HFA, hello, go and say hi to Patrick. He's there. He's wandering around.
He's wandering
around. But if you like what you hear on today's Bloodstream, make sure to subscribe to this episode so you can get all the future episodes right to your podcast player, wherever you may be.
I also want to remind you, dear listeners, that the Bloodstream Podcast is indeed made possible by our presenting sponsor, Takeda. Yes, that's right, Takeda. Takeda's got this website, bleedingdisorders.com, where you can learn all about Takeda's resources for and commitment to the bleeding disorders community. Takeda, Amy, believes in a world free of bleeds, bleed-free world. They believe in it.
They do.
And they're dedicated more than ever in their effort to offer a wide range of programs and support to help patients throughout their treatment journey, wherever on that journey they may be. And you can learn more by simply visiting bleedingdisorders.com one more time. That's bleedingdisorders.com. And for their founding and ongoing support of the Bloodstream Podcast, I would just like to say thanks, Takeda.
Thank you, Takeda.
Well, Amy, we've got a number of great segments today. I'm curious to know, most of all, though, what are you reading at the moment? It's been a long time since we've talked about your reading. I was made aware of that moments before we recorded, and I think everybody wants to know about your current book list heading into the spring.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I just actually was talking to my best girlfriend, shout out to Kara Cheevers, about this today, that my book list has been extremely picky and weird because I have put down so many books this year. I have gotten, a third of the way through and been like, no, I'm just not feeling it. And instead of pushing through, I have set them down because I'd rather be I want to be reading. I want to be wanting to get back into my book. And if I'm not feeling it, I'm just not feeling it. So right now I'm actually reading a dishy book called Bad Summer People that came out a couple years ago. And it's about rich people problems on Fire Island. And there's a murder. There's a murder, you guys. There's a murder. It's rich people. They're playing tennis and they're literally, and it's kind of funny. And anyway, I shouldn't give it away, but it's great. It's just rich people being idiots. And that's soothing for me for some reason.
Yeah, no, I watched White Lotus, so I understand.
Okay, great. Yeah, it's a whole thing.
I'm glad to hear you're honoring your time and space by not pushing through books that we shouldn't have to push through. In the I'm Fine segment, Amy Board, we've learned the importance of not pushing through just for the sake of pushing through.
You can't push through just for the sake of pushing through.
We are going to have HFA Dan Kelsey's on here in just a little bit, but before we get to that, can you tell me, what are we going to be hearing about in the Hemophilia B gene therapy segment of late? I think it has something to do with, recent news and chatter about gene therapy's presence in the community. Can you just set that up for one more time?
Well, we talked about this
last. If you would.
I think it was 2 episodes ago, we made the announcement that one of the gene therapies for hemophilia B, Becvez, actually was going off the market. They were pulling it. And they kind of said loosely overall that there wasn't interest for gene therapy, which is not entirely true. There still is a fairly successful gene therapy for hemophilia B that's on the market that people are still making those nice shared decision-making, situations with their physicians to see if they would like to, invest in that part of their lives utilizing gene therapy. And so anyway, we got Brendan Hayes on the segment with Hannah Berry, our newest Bloodstream collaborator, which is fantastic. And Brendan works in the education department at NBDF, and she actually, her entire job is innovative therapy. So she's very up to date in terms of the chatter with gene therapy, and she just gives fantastic insight on where all of that is shaking out in our treatment landscape, and where we really actually are in terms of gene therapy, specifically for hemophilia B. So pretty cool. And we also actually have a new podcast coming out here at the end of the month. At the end of March, we have a brand new podcast that's actually a reboost.
It's
what would you call
a reboot? A reboot. Just take the
a
S out. A
reboot.
reboot. Yeah.
A reboot. Take the S out. Totally. We're bringing back Ask the Expert.
We are.
Which I would dare everybody to say that 3 times fast. It's so hard to say. Ask the expert, ask the expert, ask the expert, ask the expert.
You're pretty good at it. You've had a lot of practice. That was your first Bloodstream Media project when you joined
100%.
Many years ago.
Yeah. You hired me and you said, now you have to do this.
Yeah, and then you were like, can we have a call? And on that call, you asked, what's this job? And I said, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's talk about this.
I didn't know what it meant. And look at me now.
And now you're reboosting it.
I know, I'm reboosting it. Yeah, we're doing a full reboot. But the cool thing about this season, which I am, like, my nerd hat is just, like, on point. I have been so psyched. It's really great. There is a new class of hemophilia treatment that's slowly starting to trickle onto the market, and they're calling them rebalancing agents. And
Right.
there's been kind of a bit of a debate of like, what do we call these things? And everybody's just ending up calling them rebalancing agents. But the science behind what they are attempting to do, what they've done in the lab, and what they have now accomplished in terms of how they treat hemophilia in particular is so fascinating to me. And the implications of what this could mean, not only for hemophilia A and for hemophilia B, but other rare disorders, is very exciting, and it's cool.
Yeah.
And I got some nerds on there. It's just like a bunch of nerds. But I will say it's not like our Global Hemophilia Report podcast in that it's by physicians, for physicians. It's very clinical. We really try to break down these concepts for everybody to understand, but highly recommend you guys check out Ask the Expert. We're going to launch here at the end of the month, and it'll be pretty fun.
There'll be a link in the program notes for Ask the Expert. You'll also find links at bloodstreammedia.com. So with that, let's get over to HFA's CEO Dan Kelsey, and that'll be followed by Brendan Hayes in our gene therapy segment. Okay, I am joined once again by the CEO of the Hemophilia Federation of America, Dan Kelsey, who, in spite of battling through illness, has made it here to the podcast interview today. Dan, thanks for joining us in spite of the circumstances.
Hey, I appreciate it. Happy to be here. And if I start coughing, I'll take a quick break here. So thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Of course. Yeah. So it's been a few months since you were last on the podcast and since we last really spoke. It's the end of February now. We're recording this on the day before Rare Disease Day. So maybe I'll just start there. I assume Rare Disease Day wasn't a date that held particular significance to you once upon a time. But and maybe I'm wrong and you can correct that. But since joining HFA, I assume that's different. What does Rare Disease Day mean to you?
That's a great question because prior to joining HFA, hemophilia had popped up here and there in my life, but really getting to know members of the community, it means a lot more now. And actually attending a conference with Pfizer in early December, where it was all of their rare disease people coming together to talk about issues, really brings it much closer to home and puts a face to what people, when someone says rare disease, I can think of individuals now that I know, and it really does make a difference by personalizing it. And plus, I just came off of a week full of travel last week between a Santa Fe conference and also the Yeti conference in Oregon. And we can talk more about both of those later. But yeah, once again, especially the Yeti conference really brought it home in terms of the community and what people are faced with every day.
Yeah, let's talk more about that. So, using the Yeti experience and other things that you've learned in the last, say, 3 to 6 months, what are you discovering about what people are facing and perhaps what HFA can be doing or doing more in order to address it?
I think with what people continue to face and what is really impacting our policy team today, both at HFA and I'm sure at NBDF as well, is really the concerns over insurance and the Affordable Care Act and potential of that being reopened, and if it gets reopened or overturned, what changes will be made. There's our policy team, they needless to say, they've been extremely busy trying to keep up to date as to what's happening. And with the recent bill, budget reconciliation bill that's been passed by Congress, or that's been proposed by Congress, it's going to result in some pretty extreme cuts to Medicaid, and which will definitely impact not only the hemophilia but rare disease community as a whole. So then, as people roll off of Medicaid and they go to the marketplace, then there's a good chance that the credits may not be there for people. So we are continually watching all of these things unfold and trying to make sure that people can still get their medication uh,
Right.
and get their meds, because as you can well appreciate, this isn't something where you can necessarily just go without and think you're going to be fine. It's not going to happen. And in fact, when I was at the Sanofi event, I was at a reception, and the person with Sanofi who deals with payers said, yeah, what we're hearing now from payers is employers are telling them, yeah, we don't think we need to cover hemophilia medications anymore. And which means that
Wow.
they've been approached by some type of a alternative funding plan. So saying, no, you don't need to cover that. It can be taken care of over here. So, it's just hearing things like that makes me realize that our work is never done.
Yeah, and I appreciate that perspective. I've also noticed in my inbox emails from HFA keeping community posted on what's happening in Washington, what might this mean for you in the community. I'm curious, as a leader, how do you balance the urgent need to communicate with the community and your constituents about what's happening, what may happen, so we're preparing in case a switch gets flipped, because as you just outlined, the consequences are dire. How do you help, from a communications and engagement standpoint, people prepare for that without coming off as alarmist or going so far that people tune out because it just seems, hyperbolic? How do you think about that? And specifically, how are you thinking about that right now with respect to the bleeding disorders community?
Boy, you're asking some great questions here. um,
Thank you.
yeah, no, this is a real challenge, because what we're trying to remain focused on the core issues of coverage and how it's really impacting coverage. Because in talking to Mary Catherine Moffat, who is my VP of Policy and Advocacy, she is continually focused on that, trying to not overwhelm the community with, oh my gosh, this is happening or that is happening, and then people just become immune to it, as you said. So it's really trying to do a lot of work behind the scenes and make sure that we can be as impactful as we can, so that when something is being sent out, that it really does have impact. And in saying that, what we're also trying to do as well is make sure that what we're doing is really monitoring the frequency with which we're sending things out. So there are some things where maybe we won't send this out at this time. And we've pulled back on other areas because it's always that balancing act of trying to make sure we're keeping the community informed without just absolutely overwhelming the community. One of the things that is also has come up that as a person working as a career nonprofit individual, I never thought I would have to deal with is concerns over people attending a symposium and ICE being present there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so
I didn't even think about that.
yeah, and as you know, with Symposium, we try to have a fair number of Spanish speaking community members there and provide translation services and so on.
And it's in San
And
Diego this
yeah,
year.
and with San Diego, we looked into this probably a month or so ago. Someone recalled that when we were at the same location, and I think 19, that there were some ICE officers that were staying there. So they thought, oh gosh, what are people's rights? What are attendees' rights? So
Wow.
reached out to legal counsel, and legal counsel put us in contact with their immigration attorneys that they use, and they provided some information for us about what your rights are should ICE knock on your door. And basically, they still need to have a warrant, but it's still something that is of concern. And I've shared a flyer that was prepared by the Association of Immigration Attorneys surrounding that, provided a copy to our outside group that helps us with planning the meeting, as well as with Rigo in Southern California. We've got copies of that in both English and Spanish, but I had a chance to talk to Rigo at the Yeti meeting, and he did give me a heads up and said, yeah, we're still having some problems getting people attending because of concerns about ICE. So it's just a very unique atmosphere right now in terms of communication and trying to provide assurance while still having a great meeting, which we're gonna have a great meeting. It's just, it's sad that people feel like they maybe should not attend because of concerns that they could be deported.
Like you said, something you never figured you'd have to deal with in your career. But I'm glad you're bringing it up because honestly hadn't even thought about that. And this is a very important consideration. So, for anyone listening, if you are interested in attending Symposium, or frankly, for that matter, any bleeding disorders community event, but have concerns about registering your information somewhere, showing up to a certain location, reach out either to HFA, to your local member organization, or your local NHF chapter organization and get more specifics about what is known in your area and what your rights are. This is going to probably be a case by case and highly sensitive situation for a while, but it's great to hear from you, Dan, that leaders like you are not only thinking about this, but having conversation and exchanging information with other leaders at other organizations. This isn't going to be an easy thing to navigate, but as long as we're doing it in a cohesive, collaborative way, we give ourselves the best chance possible at, doing as much as we can with extenuating circumstances. But to move to Symposium more holistically, and speaking of environments, the backdrop for last year's Symposium, Dan, as I'm sure you remember, was rather different than the backdrop of this year, which comes with its own complications, some of which we just discussed. But from a little bit more of a bleeding disorders community specific lens, what is it about this year's symposium that you're most interested in or want to highlight for folks?
We are going to be back with some of the things that we've had in the past with the pre-conference and the advocacy pre-conference, where the member org executive directors will be there, and we'll also have different invited people there. So that should be very, very good and give our advocacy team a chance to to really meet a lot of the community members. As you know, we've had a lot of changes. And speaking of the advocacy team, two members of that team are blood brothers. So I know there was concern in the past about there not being anyone with a bleeding disorder on staff, and so wanted to let the community know that yes, we do have two blood brothers that are on staff now that are part of the policy and advocacy team. So that's awesome that they'll be able to provide that insight. And then in terms of the sessions that we're having, we're using different groups this year for childcare. So we're going to have some new programs for the kids than what we've had in the past. We are involving Gut Monkey this year, thanks to some additional support. Having seen them in action at Yeti, there will definitely be some excitement and some high energy coming through Gut Monkey people. So I think there will be some fun changes at Symposium this year, and then we're still going to be talking about some of the newer and emerging therapies, and really trying to do things more cross generationally. We're also going to be having our receptions that we've had in the past, including LGBTQ reception and and a general cultural connection. And I was looking over the list of items or different sessions that we'll be having, and something that I don't think we've had in the past, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Patrick, because obviously you've been around much longer than I have with the community, but we're having something on Friday evening called Blood Vibration, and it's with Max Feinstein. So where he'll be having a session, playing some of his music and so on, and doing some storytelling. So I don't think we've had anything that late before. So we're definitely trying to make it more cross generational and trying to reach all the attendees with this. So yeah, I think we're going to have some really fun sessions and return of some things that look more familiar. And one of the neat things that we've illustrated recently in social media is one of our attendees from last year, Raleigh, who a lot of people know. He made a friend who is a little guy who is probably, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 years old at last year's meeting, and they stayed in contact throughout the year and have promised to hang out with each other again at this year's conference. It was something that I know Murali really enjoyed at last year's meeting, and he's looking forward to at this year's meeting with really making those connections.
That story is featured on hfasymposium.org, where you can go to learn more about what Symposium entails, look at the agenda. It is being held March 27th through the 30th in San Diego. And I'll just read the very end of this excerpt here from Morale before we say goodbye to Dan. The symposium has something for everyone: education, entertainment, advocacy, or relaxation. By the way, on the entertainment side, no, I'm not aware of anything like Max's blood vibrations happening before Dan, so kudos on that. Okay. It's been a place where we also memorialize community members who are no longer with us, irrespective of my relationship with them. You can have it all in one place each year. This is where I belong each year. So can't get a much better endorsement from someone who, as you said, Dan, a lot of people know and respect Morale. So thank you for joining us to give these updates. I appreciate you being a good watchdog for the community and staying abreast of the things that are happening behind the scenes and are in early stages, but could have tremendous consequence to us. So that, as a community member, I want to say thank you for that. I think the updates about having staff that are blood brothers is meaningful, and I appreciate you highlighting that. And to just hear about some of the high level stuff happening at Symposium, it sounds like it'll be another great meeting, albeit one happening in a political climate that we'll just say is a bit unfortunate, especially for some in our community. So all that being said, looking forward to Symposium, Dan, and appreciate you spending some time today to let people know about it.
All right. As always, definitely appreciate it. And thank you, Patrick.
Hello, Bloodstream listeners. You're back with your girl Hannah for another segment of Gene Therapy, a whole new world. Last week, we had the pleasure of hearing from Dr. Mark Kay and genetic counselor Kaylee Dollarshell about how the history of gene therapy and the exciting advancements that have brought not just the bleeding disorders community, but many rare diseases closer to life-changing treatments. Today, we have the absolute honor of welcoming Brendan Hayes, the Senior Director of Education Innovative Therapies from the National Bleeding Disorders Foundation. Brendan is a powerhouse of knowledge, leading the charge in educating and guiding change in the community. And on a personal note, I have to say, Brendan is one of my most cherished mentors. Brendan is here to help us unpack the current landscape of gene therapy for hemophilia and what the community is saying about it. But before we dive in, it's a whole new world gene therapy segment brought to you by CSLBehring and their hemophilia B gene therapy treatment. To learn more about gene therapy, hear patient stories, and view additional resources, visit beyondhemb.com or download B Support wherever you get your apps for more information and to manage your treatment journey. Brendan, it is always a pleasure to chat with you. Let's start with something that's been coming up more and more in community discussions. There's been talk in the media that interest in gene therapy within hemophilia community might not be as high as expected. From your perspective, what are you hearing? Are people excited, hesitant?
It's an interesting question. I think it's timely, and I think there are a variety of reasons. I think that the promise of gene therapy is not the reality of gene therapy. So if we start to think about when gene therapy was first really talked about, and we really started to see some, a lot of action in that area, I think everybody really thought, this is it. This is a cure. And as time progressed, as we learned more and more through clinical trials, we realized, this really isn't a cure. This is a durable treatment option. And so I think that was something that, that was a surprise to many. I also would say that, people are still hesitant to jump into new innovation. We can't discount our community's history with the HIV crisis. It's still fresh in lots of folks' mind. And so I think there's some hesitancy there. One of the things that I think is so cool about my job is I get to talk to people who've had gene therapy, right? I get to pick their brains. So cool. And I always ask why, why did you do gene therapy? And the answers I get are pretty varied, but it's really cool when I hear them say, you know what, this community's done a lot for me and I want to give back. And this is my opportunity to really think about, impacting research and future generations. And so I felt like this was something I wanted to do. There's still a lot of area for improvement in terms of quality of life. And ultimately, I think that's the promise of gene therapy, right?
Wow, that really is interesting. It sounds like there's such a mix of perspectives, which makes sense for such a big decision. Now, when we talk about treatment options, gene therapy is just one piece of a much larger landscape. Why is that so important to continue to expanding options, including gene therapy for people with hemophilia?
In terms of demand, gene therapy is not indicated for everybody. So I think that was another thing that was a bit of a surprise. It's not indicated for a pediatric population. So you have to be 18 or older. So that knocks out a ton of the community, right? You also have to be healthy, meaning, you can't really have any liver disease or comorbidities. So that was something too that, again, fewer and fewer people can do it. There are just all of these things that we didn't really understand in the beginning when everybody was getting so fired up about gene therapy. And as time progressed, we learned more. And then I also think that there's still a lot of, mystery around gene therapy. I'll say mystery. meaning that there are so many unknowns. And there are things that we don't even know that we don't know about gene therapy. And so, we're thinking about bleeding disorders in this conversation, but, I think the rare disease community as a whole is benefiting from the work that has been done in our community. And so the learnings will be used in other rare diseases in hopes that we will find treatment options, cures for some of those as well.
I love that point. Having choices means people can find what works best for them. And speaking of the bigger picture, innovation in hemophilia treatments has come a long way, but there's always more on the horizon. From your perspective, why is it critical to keep pushing gene therapy forward in the hemophilia space?
I really do think it's for patients. We do have some pretty great treatment options compared to what we saw 10 years ago. So we see how innovation is making the lives of people with bleeding disorders better. If you look at what's currently approved, if you look at what's in the pipeline, it is amazing. If you take a step back, I am a mom of 2 adult sons with severe hemophilia, and they don't live with me. They have their own lives, but that doesn't mean that I don't worry about them. And if I think about the amount of mental energy that patients and their caregivers are, struggling with on a daily basis. I mean, to have a product that you didn't have to worry for some long period of time, you didn't have to worry about bleeding and spontaneous bleeding, all of those things. I think that is one thing that's cool about gene therapy. When it works, you don't have to worry about spontaneous bleeding for a period of time. And that is really life-changing.
It's exciting to think about where we could be in the next few years. But of course, advancements only matter if they align with what the community actually wants and needs. With all the conversations you are having, what are you hearing directly from the community? What are the biggest hopes or concerns about gene therapy?
I think it's intriguing to think about, well, there might be a particular time in my life that might be better suited to me doing gene therapy. Maybe I want to do more, kind of athletic pursuits. Maybe I want to be super healthy when my kids are teenagers so I can, really enjoy them and be very active with them. I spoke to a couple of folks who had gene therapy and they didn't have a great response, but they were thrilled because they didn't have to worry about spontaneous bleeds and they weren't super active. So it was life-changing for them because, again, they didn't have to think about, hemophilia all day long. So there's all kinds of different perspectives.
I always love and cherish your perspective on things, and I love how tapped in you are with the people in the community and how they are really feeling. I know you have an exciting session coming up at BDC. Can you tell us a little bit more about your upcoming Candid Conversations and what you're hoping to accomplish there?
We have this session called Candid Conversations, and it all started, back 6-7 years ago when we started thinking about gene therapy and how are people going to feel like they kind of have to do it. If you have this thing that's going to be curative, am I going to be pressured to do it? And so we really wanted to explore that. So we've done a variety of things over the years with this session. So what we're doing this year is, I kind of sat back and thought, gene therapy, where are we really today? We're seeing situations where pharmaceutical companies are discontinuing use of gene therapies. What does that mean? It's the same kind of conversation. What does this mean for our community? So it's all about innovation. Where are we going? And should we still expect to see innovation? So that's one of the things that we're going to talk about. We're going to learn more in that session about some of these, early stage trial treatment options. I think it's going to be really cool.
Brendan, this has been just such a great conversation. For anyone listening who's curious about gene therapy but unsure where to start, what advice would you give them?
I think that gene therapy, in reality, all treatments, it's not something to be entered into lightly. I think you really need to think about your values, what's important to you. Really think about what you want to be doing in your life. So it's really important for people to do their research and to talk to their providers and to really think about what's important and what do they value and what do they need to have a great quality of life. Because that's, at the end of the day, that's really what it's all about.
Gosh, I always appreciate your insight and the way you break things down in a way that really resonates with the community. Thank you, Brendan, so much for joining us today. And to our listeners out there, whether you're feeling excited about gene therapy, still weighing your options, or just here to learn, these conversations are all about keeping you informed. Next time on Gene Therapy, A Whole New World, we're diving into the latest data on hemogenics, the first gene therapy for hemophilia B. 4 years post-infusion, the results are in. So, what do they mean for patients, providers, and the healthcare system as a whole? We'll be sitting down with experts to unpack the findings, discuss their significance, and explore how long-term data is shaping the future of gene therapy. You sure won't want to miss this one, so be sure to join us on next episode. Until then, Bloodstream listeners, take care.
Well, thank you again, Dan and Brendan, both for joining the program today. Thanks as always to our presenting sponsor, Takeda, and remember bleedingdisorders.com for more. And thank you, CSLBehring, for supporting our gene therapy segment. We could not produce the Bloodstream podcast without your support, and we are grateful for it. All right, Amy, our next episode comes out on April 11th. What can listeners expect to hear on April 11th?
I can't begin to tell you how many community stories we have in the hopper. We're gonna have to
We've
like
got a big
figure
hopper
out.
too. It's a pretty
We have
big hopper.
it's a hopper.
We're gonna need a double XL hopper.
Anyway, everybody's been really great on getting us their stories and things
Lot
lately
of
since
hop.
we've been harking on it. Lot of hop. So anyway, stick around. It'll be great. It'll be great.
Tons of hop coming for you on April 11th. And with that, that is all the hop we have for this episode. Be sure to subscribe to the Bloodstream podcast wherever you listen to have the next episode delivered to you the moment it goes live.
Hey, and loyal listeners, remember, email us at mailbag@bloodstreammedia.com to get in the hopper. You can
Get in the
literally
hopper.
get your story in the hopper.
Hop on in
We
there,
would love
hops.
to hear. I know. We would love to hear from you. And you can always find us on social media. Both PJL and I are on social media. And of course, Bloodstream Media. Everywhere.
And
Everywhere you get your socials.
You can't avoid us. We have found every platform, and we have a handle. I am your hopper, Patrick James Lynch.
And I am your other hopper, Amy Board.
And until next time, take self-care of yourself. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.